What if I told you that Blake Lively just made a move in court so bold it could completely backfire and cost her everything? Not just legally, but publicly too. The judge hasn't even decided which state's law applies. Yet Blake is demanding damages right now, skipping critical steps, defying orders, and forcing the court's hand. This isn't just a filing gone wrong. It's a legal gamble that could explode right in front of Hollywood's eyes. Stay tuned, because what's coming next could change this entire case forever. The what? Story begins in a way that no one quite expected, because when it comes to this ongoing battle between Blake Lively and the forces surrounding her, everything seems to spin out of control faster than anyone can predict. And just when the air starts to settle, a new document drops, a new motion appears, and the conversation once again explodes into chaos and disbelief. Now people are talking about this latest filing, where Blake Lively has asked the court for something bold, something that feels almost impatient, as if she is tired of waiting for the usual legal process to unfold. She is demanding that the judge rule now, right now, on her request for attorney fees for punitive damages and for treble damages under California's Civil Code Section 47.1. A request that caught everyone off guard, because normally these things come much later after the dust has settled, after the facts have been laid bare, after the judge has decided which laws even apply. But Blake seems determined to get an answer before that even happens, and that single decision has sent shockwaves through observers because it might change how the entire case unfolds. See, there is a lot buried in this motion, more than most people realize. And as you read deeper, you start to sense that this isn't just about money or damages. It's about who controls the story. It's about who gets to claim victory first. It's about power and timing and perception. Wayfair, which is one of the parties on the other side, has already fired back, arguing that her claims have no real standing because of something crucial. The question of jurisdiction and whether the California laws she's relying on can even reach this far. Wayfair insists they can't, because they say these laws stop at the borders of California, and that what happened here didn't occur there, and that Blake herself isn't even a California resident. It's a point that sounds technical, but it could decide everything, because California's FEHA laws, the ones designed to protect employees from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, are famously territorial. They only apply inside California unless there's a strong and undeniable connection to the state, and here that connection might be too weak to hold up. So what does that mean? It means that if the events took place outside of California, if the people involved live and work outside California, then FEHA doesn't apply, even if the employer is based there, and the courts in California have made that clear time and time again. And what's more, federal courts outside the state almost always defer to California's position that their laws shouldn't be stretched across borders. So already we see a battle, not just over what happened, but where it happened and whose laws get to decide it. And that choice of law is everything, because it determines what damages can be awarded, what defenses can be used, and what kind of relief is even possible. But here's the twist. When the judge dismissed parts of the earlier case, he never actually decided which state's laws apply, and that's where things start to unravel. Because the motions filed by all sides were in conflict, Blake wanted California law to apply, while others like Reynolds and Sloan were pushing for New York law. And instead of choosing, the judge left it open, saying that more factual development was needed before he could decide. So right now, no one really knows which laws control this case, and yet Blake's new motion assumes that California law already applies, and that's why people are calling it premature. Maybe even risky, because she's asking for something that depends on a decision the judge hasn't made yet, and might not make for months. And that's where the suspense builds, because every lawyer watching this knows that a motion built on uncertain ground is like building a house on sand. It might look sturdy, but one shift and it collapses, and that's what Wayfair pointed out in its reply. They said that before any decision about fees or damages can be made, the court first has to determine the governing law, and since that hasn't happened yet, the motion should be denied outright. And that argument is getting traction, because the record shows that the judge dismissed the earlier defamation claims without deciding which state law to use. He even said in his order that the law applicable to the claims cannot be determined absent further factual development that's legal. Speak for it's too soon. And that one phrase could decide everything, because it means the foundation for Blake's motion isn't there yet. Now let's go even deeper into the reasoning, because this is where the details get wild. The court explained that to figure out which state law applies, you have to look at several factors: where the plaintiff lives, where the alleged injury occurred, and where the alleged misconduct was directed. In this case, Blake lives and works in New York. The lawsuit was filed in New York federal court, and the alleged defamatory statements were published in the New York Times, which is based in New York. So under normal rules, that would mean New York law controls, because that's where the reputational harm, if any, would be felt. But Blake's team argues that California still has a strong connection, because Wayfair is a California company. The statements in question relate to a California agency complaint, and the attorneys involved are from California. But even with all that, most judges in New York would still lean toward applying New York law, unless the California connection is absolutely overwhelming. And that's not the case here, because while California plays a role, it's not the center of gravity. The center is clearly New York. And that matters because under New York law, there are no treble or punitive damages for defamation outside of certain narrow circumstances, while California's 47.1 statute allows for both. So if New York law governs, Blake can't get what she's asking for. But if California law governs, she might. And that's the tug of war right now. One set of laws favors one side, the other favors the other side, and the judge can't use both. He has to pick one. And that's why this motion feels like a gamble. A high-stakes roll of the dice, because she's asking him to take her side before he's even decided which side of the board they're playing on, and to make it even more complex, she's asking the judge to make a finding that she acted without malice, which is a necessary element under California statute. But again, there's been no evidentiary hearing, no fact-finding, no trial, nothing in the record, yet that proves her statements were made without malice, and that's not something a court can just assume. It has to be proven, or at least tested. And that's exactly what Wayfair's attorneys have pointed out, saying that her motion is not just premature but procedurally improper, because those findings haven't been made, and because discovery, the process where evidence is exchanged, is still ongoing. The suspense in this whole thing is that Blake's filing is bold and strategic, but it might also be self-defeating, because if the judge sees it as overreaching, it could hurt her credibility with the court. And right now, credibility is everything, especially when she's asking the same judge who already told her that certain issues were not yet ripe for decision to go ahead and decide them anyway, and that's where the tension lies. Will the judge stand firm and tell her to wait, or will he take the bait and rule early, setting a brand new precedent in a case that's already breaking new ground? That question hangs over everything, and no one knows which way it will go. And meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the speculation is intense. People are analyzing every word, every filing, every citation, because it's not just about the law anymore. It's about perception, about who appears to be in control, about who's confident and who's desperate. And right now, both sides are walking a fine line, with the entire entertainment world watching. Because this case has become bigger than just a lawsuit. It's become a reflection of how Hollywood power plays out in real time, where reputation is currency and every motion filed feels like another move on a chessboard where both players think they're winning, until the final move changes everything. And that's the energy that makes this story so gripping. Because even as legal analysts try to predict what's coming next, there's this feeling that something explosive is building beneath the surface. Something that could flip the narrative completely and leave everyone stunned once again. The courtroom atmosphere surrounding this entire case feels electric, as if every document filed could light a fuse that leads to something unpredictable. And while most people outside the legal world might look at a filing and see pages of technical language, those who follow these stories closely know that beneath the calm text lies a current of strategy, emotion, and quiet panic. Because at the center of all of this is a question that refuses to die: who is right and who is rushing too far? Ahead, Blake Lively seems certain that she deserves to be heard. Now that the time for waiting has passed, that the judge should look at her motion for attorney fees and damages immediately. But that insistence is exactly what makes this moment so captivating, because it signals a kind of urgency. A push that makes analysts wonder what she knows that others do not. Perhaps she believes that the court will lean her way, or perhaps she senses that the tide might soon turn and she wants to seize the moment before it does. Whatever the reason, her decision to act now, rather than wait, has changed the energy around this entire dispute, and left even seasoned observers wondering whether she has overplayed her hand when Wayfair replied, they did more than argue law. They told a story too, one about patience, process, and fairness. Their lawyers painted a picture of a system that must be respected, where timing matters and where decisions built on uncertain foundations can backfire dramatically. And while Blake's team framed her motion as a pursuit of justice and principle, Wayfair cast it as premature, overreaching, and unnecessary. Both perspectives echo through the legal community as commentators debate whether this case will become a precedent for how far celebrity-driven legal actions can push the limits of jurisdiction. The discussion around jurisdiction itself has taken on a life of its own because it touches every corner of this battle. Blake's lawyers keep pointing to the California connection, to the fact that the opposing side is based there, and that her claims originated there, while Wayfair's lawyers keep reminding the court that the case lives in New York, that the injury, if any, was felt there, that the publication was there, that Blake herself resides there. It's a tug of war between two legal worlds, each with its own definitions of justice, and each with rules that could determine very different outcomes. If the court says California law applies, Blake could potentially recover much more and frame her actions as part of a protected process. If the court says New York law applies, then her claims lose much of their strength and the road ahead becomes steep. So as the filings pile up and the tension grows, the air thickens with uncertainty. Every lawyer, every journalist, every follower of this saga keeps refreshing the docket, waiting for the judge to make a move, but he hasn't. And that silence speaks louder than any statement. It suggests caution. It suggests that the court is aware of the magnitude of what is being asked, because what Blake seeks is not small. It's not routine. She's asking a federal judge in New York to apply a California statute that has never before been tested in this way. She's asking him to read between the lines of precedent and make a first-of-its-kind ruling. And judges do not take that lightly. The suspense deepens when you look at how the previous order was written. The one where the judge dismissed certain claims, he used language that left doors half open. Phrases like absent further factual development, meaning that there are missing pieces that still need to be built before conclusions can be reached. And yet, despite that uncertainty, Blake's motion reads as if those doors are already closed, as if the missing facts have already been found. And that's what makes observers nervous, because courts prefer facts over faith. And her filing seems to ask the judge to believe, to trust that her intentions were good, that malice was absent, that fairness demands a ruling now. But as Wayfair pointed out, belief is not enough. There must be proof, or at least process to discover proof. And that hasn't happened yet. Discovery is ongoing. Depositions have not finished. The evidentiary record has not been built. So how can the court determine the absence of malice when it hasn't even looked at all the evidence? That question lingers in every conversation about this case and adds a quiet edge to every commentary, because it's not about blame or guilt. It's about timing, precision, and the order of operations. When you move too fast in law, the ground can shift under you. And right now, it feels like Blake's team is sprinting across a bridge that hasn't finished being built. Yet the judge already signaled earlier that he prefers to wait, that he doesn't want to decide until the factual landscape is clearer. And yet here she is knocking on his door, again asking for a decision that depends on the very facts still in dispute. It's the kind of move that fascinates those who love legal drama, because it's both confident and risky. At the same time, one wrong step and the entire strategy could collapse. And yet if it works, if the judge entertains her request, it could change everything for her in an instant. And that possibility alone keeps everyone watching, because the outcome could shift the balance of power. In this case, overnight. Meanwhile, legal analysts have begun to revisit the details of the earlier dismissal, and something strange has come up. The judge's order referenced unpublished cases, decisions that technically lack binding authority in California courts, but that he used as persuasive guidance. And while that isn't unheard of, it's rare, especially in a case attracting this much attention. He drew from cases like Tron versus Eat Club and Bond versus Lilly, using their reasoning to support conclusions about defamation. Privilege and fair reporting, that's significant because it means he was willing to stretch precedent slightly to make his ruling fit the circumstances, and that stretch gives both sides ammunition. Blake's team might argue it shows he's open-minded, willing to interpret the law creatively. Wayfair's team might argue it shows uncertainty, vulnerability, and grounds for appeal. No matter which side you believe, the fact remains that this judge is walking a thin line between precedent and practicality, and in that space, anything can happen. The silence since the filing suggests that he is weighing his options carefully. Maybe he's reading between the lines of both sides' arguments. Maybe he's calculating how a ruling here could ripple outward through future cases. Because if he grants this motion now, it becomes the first of its kind, a precedent for applying California's harassment fee statute in a New York federal courtroom. And that's no small thing. It would invite scrutiny, commentary, maybe even appeal, and in a case already filled with headlines, that might be the last thing he wants. So for now, the waiting game continues. And with every day that passes, the suspense only builds, because neither side seems ready. To step back, both are standing firm. Both believe time is on their side, and both seem convinced that the law will eventually validate their position. But one of them is wrong, and that is what keeps the entire audience hooked to the story. Every whisper, every filing, every court update feels like a clue to what's coming next. And until the judge finally speaks, no one can say which way this story will turn, or how deep the impact will go. And that uncertainty, that delicate tension between silence and revelation, is what makes this moment one of the most captivating stretches of this entire legal drama. As the hours passed and the court transcript continued to circulate across the entertainment world, it became impossible for Blake Lively's team to contain the narrative, because every page of that filing only deepened the sense that something inside her camp had gone off the rails. The more she tried to justify her actions, the more contradictions appeared between what her attorneys claimed in one motion and what the actual evidence suggested in another. And it was this inconsistency that started fueling a new wave of commentary from entertainment lawyers and PR analysts across social media, who were now openly wondering whether the actress's once untouchable Hollywood reputation could even survive another month of this relentless exposure. And while Justin Baldoni's legal team remained composed, maintaining silence in the face of escalating public scrutiny, it was clear they knew exactly what they were doing, because every response from Blake seemed to dig her deeper into the hole they had predicted from the start. And if you read between the lines of the filings, you could see how her narrative was slowly unraveling, not just legally but emotionally, as the pressure mounted and fans began to notice subtle changes in her tone in recent interviews, the carefully crafted smiles, the strategic captions, the overly curated posts that once served as armor were now being dissected as signs of strain, and everyone from TikTok creators to Hollywood insiders began speculating that the real story wasn't just about a lawsuit, it was about control, reputation, and the fear of losing everything she had spent 2 decades building. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos stood Taylor Swift, a silent, yet unavoidable presence whose name kept resurfacing in deposition subpoenas and speculative reports. Not because she was a participant, but because the ripple effects of her connection to both parties had become impossible to ignore. It was in that climate of tension that whispers began circulating, that the upcoming evidentiary hearing could potentially expose previously sealed communications messages that might clarify who was telling the truth and who was rewriting history for the sake of optics. And while Blake's attorneys filed motion after motion to suppress those materials, citing privacy and relevance concerns, the court's language in response grew noticeably sharper. Judges rarely show irritation in official rulings, but observers noted that certain lines in the recent reply read as though the court had lost patience with the continuous delays, and that observation alone sent shockwaves through the fan base because it hinted that the judge might finally be ready to lift the lid on documents that had long been protected under confidentiality orders. And if that happens, the internet could witness a real-time implosion of celebrity myth-making, where the difference between curated image and courtroom reality collapses entirely, because once those records are made public, there will be no PR strategy strong enough to rewrite the tone or intention behind raw conversations. By now, major outlets had picked up the scent with legal correspondence from Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and even Rolling Stone, beginning to dedicate full-length analyses to the case, dissecting its implications for free speech, celebrity accountability, and the boundaries of public narrative. And one of the most striking aspects was how these pieces no longer framed Blake Lively as the victim of media harassment, but as a potential participant in the very machinery she once claimed to condemn. That tonal shift was subtle but devastating, because when mainstream outlets change their framing, it signals a turning point in perception. And perception in Hollywood often dictates survival just as much as talent or success ever could. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's team seemed content letting the coverage unfold naturally, occasionally dropping cryptic remarks about transparency and truth, but never descending into the kind of emotional defense that Blake's publicists routinely issued. And this contrast only amplified the imbalance between them, making Blake appear increasingly reactionary while Baldoni appeared measured, even strategic. At the same time, social media turned into a battlefield of opinion, with creators analyzing body language footage from red carpets, past interviews, and award show interactions. Between the two, searching for clues about when the professional partnership began to fracture and what that might reveal about the case. And though most of these analyses were speculative, it was undeniable that the public fascination had transformed the lawsuit into a serialized drama where every new filing functioned like a plot twist, and every silent week felt like the calm before an inevitable explosion. And in that sense, the narrative had already escaped the confines of the courtroom, becoming part of the cultural bloodstream, where fans, journalists, and even fellow celebrities became characters in a story that refused to stay confined to legal paperwork. The irony of this spiral wasn't lost on longtime Hollywood watchers, who pointed out that the same celebrity system that had once elevated Blake to the pinnacle of media adoration was now eating its own. The dynamic of control had inverted, and the actress who once dictated narratives through glossy magazines and exclusive campaigns was now at the mercy of the very same digital ecosystem she had tried to manipulate. And in a poetic way, that's what made this case such a landmark moment, because it wasn't just about defamation or damages anymore. It was about who controls the story, who gets to define truth in the age of viral media, and who ultimately pays the price when public perception turns into a courtroom weapon. In the end, what began as a legal skirmish over defamation and damages has transformed into something far larger, a mirror reflecting the fragility of fame and the volatility of truth. In the modern age, Blake Lively's courtroom battles have become symbolic of a deeper reckoning, one that asks uncomfortable questions about how far an image can stretch before it breaks, and how quickly a story can turn from a press release into a public trial of character and intention. And while Justin Baldoni's silence has been strategic, his restraint has only made the noise around Blake louder. Her every move now dissected her every filing. Reinterpreted through the lens of motive and consequence, the court will soon render its next decision. But the real verdict has already begun to form in the court of public opinion, where silence often speaks louder than statements and composure outweighs outrage. What happens next will determine more than the outcome of a lawsuit. It will shape the boundaries of narrative control for every celebrity who watches this case unfold. Because if the documents are unsealed and the truth laid bare, no amount of branding will be able to rewrite what the evidence reveals. This is the moment where Hollywood's illusions meet accountability, where power meets transparency, and where the carefully built walls of perfection start to crumble under the weight of reality. And when that curtain finally drops, whether Blake rises again or fades into the shadow of her own making, will depend not on lawyers or fans, but on whether the world is still willing to believe in the version of her that once seemed untouchable.